Hi, this is Minesh Baxi, and I have a very special guest for us today. Now, if you live in Troy area, maybe you have heard the name before, or you're seeing the signs around if you are currently in the season here. And a good friend of mine, I've known him for quite some time. He's a family man. He has been serving the community for a while. So I want to make sure that you are able to understand what's going on in current situation in the city, but also get an inside look into Mr. Ethan Baker. So Ethan, welcome.
Thanks, Minesh. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's like one of those situations where it's never perfect, right? It's like, I'm sure in this particular conversation also, I'm not going to be perfect, and I'm sure you're not going to be perfect as well. There is nobody hopefully going to critique us from that perspective. But let's do this. We'll just ask some questions about, I'll get a little bit background about you, your family, your occupation. You've been on the city council for a while.
Yep.
And now you're running for mayor.
Yeah.
And some of the issues that are important to you and how you see with the city. So let's just start with you. I mean, you obviously live in Troy. You are married. You have a family. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Listen, I live in Troy. I lived in Troy for 10 years. We moved here in 2009. We chose to come to Troy to raise our kids, to have the kind of life in Troy that we all love about Troy, with the green spaces and the parks and the business and the restaurants and the shopping and the good community family feel. That's the reason we came to Troy, and it was 2009 that we came here.
Okay.
So my wife and I moved here with at the time, our 2-year-old daughter and our infant son. Since we've been here, we've had another daughter, so I have 3 wonderful kids now. They are age 12, 10, and 7. So
great. Fantastic.
We are loving it. We love it.
Yeah, my son is 11, my daughter is 16, and we've been in Troy forever, and we'll talk about that. As you know, my family, actually my in-laws owned a Chinese restaurant, which I'm now saying owned because they just closed in August, you know.
I know, I have to say, losing Kim's restaurant in Troy is like, I think people are more upset about losing Kim's than almost anything in the past several months. It's been really hard for us, and I can only imagine what it's like for your family. But I will say, 44 years, almost 45. Almost 45. Kim's was a mainstay in our community, and I can't tell you, I've never knocked on a door in Troy where someone hasn't mentioned the almond chicken or the egg rolls or something. So you know it to be true, and I love Margaret. I mean, Margaret was always there, and she was so good to our family. So
exactly.
We will miss Kim's.
Yeah, exactly, and you know that. And again, we'll talk about Kim's some other time, but yes, it was one of those places which was kind of the landmark of the place.
Right.
Of Troy. They've been there for so long, so people really came out in droves to support it as well.
Right.
So good. So tell me a little bit about your profession.
Sure. So I'm a lawyer. I have my own law practice here in Troy. I'm a sole practitioner. I do have some other people that do contract work for me and stuff, but it's a great practice on Crooks Road between Big Beaver and Maple.
Okay.
I do a mix of business law, which ranges from small to mid-sized business representation for corporate stuff, for some litigation, whatever they need.
Sure.
I also do a good portion of estate planning, which I think is a great service for people in our community. Estate planning everyone needs it, in my opinion, and not just because I'm the lawyer, but no, it's important for your family, and I try to help people work through that, and then I kind of handle whatever else comes my way. That's the benefit of being on your own, is you can say, okay, I think I want to work on that, and if it doesn't seem right, then you pass it on to someone else.
Exactly, and the interesting part for me is because my father, he was 90 years old last year, passed away, and I kept almost yelling at him for 20 years. He was in India.
Yeah.
To have a will. He never did.
Right.
And a year later, there is a property which is contested property because obviously you know what happened there, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens. And I'm sorry to see that happen, but a lot of families don't understand the value of, like you just said, estate planning.
Right.
So good. So what prompted you to get into politics? Obviously, it's not an easy sport from any perspective.
It's not, and it's only gotten rougher, I think, over the past few years. But I've always been someone who likes to help people.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people say that who are in politics, but we all come with our own stories and our own backgrounds. When I was really young, I worked for President and Mrs. Reagan in their post-presidential office.
Okay.
I started as an intern in college, and then when I graduated, they hired me, and I worked for them for the last several years of the president's life. So I saw politics at a big level in that sense. But when we moved here, back then, I never thought I'd be a candidate. I just thought I liked helping other people, and I was working for President Reagan, and what greater person, right?
Yes.
But we moved here, and right after we moved here, one of my neighbors happened to be the realtor that that had the listing for the house that we bought.
Okay.
And I was out in the driveway one day. I remember it very distinctly with the kids. I think we were doing chalk on the cement.
Okay.
And she came by and she said, "Hey, Ethan, you're a lawyer, right?" And I said, "I am." And she said, "Well, we have our HOA board, and one of the board members who's been on for a long time was a lawyer, and he's just moved.
Sure.
And we always like to have someone who's a lawyer on our board.
Sure.
Would you be interested?"
Correct.
And I said, "Okay." I thought it was a good way to meet some neighbors and get started in the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
And I did. And that first year, I really liked the group of people, and I got on. And by the second year, this is back in 2010, they made me president of the HOA. So, I started really at that local neighbor level
Correct.
of helping out your neighbors. And, HOA boards, there's lots of horror stories about them, but they really do. I mean, you talk about levels of government, levels of service. That HOA really touches your neighborhood. It's neighbor to neighbor, and you deal with a lot of heated issues because it's their home.
Correct.
And it's what matters to people the most probably in this world in that sense. So I got involved helping out in the neighborhood. I realized I really liked it.
Okay.
I liked trying to go deal with some disputes or just help people out in general. We added some social events, and it became really kind of an organically grown, fun public service. And then time went on, and then 2015 comes, and all of a sudden I'm running for city council and get elected to city council. I've spent the past 4 years there, and since I've been on council, I've spent a lot of time in the community working with organizations, some of our great nonprofits, and really in the businesses and everything. And you learn so much, and you get so involved. And here I am running for mayor. So it's kind of been a hodgepodge of things over the years, and it's just kind of fell into this. But I love public service. I love trying to help people. I love bringing people together when you can.
Sure.
I think the more we can do that, especially in politics or in service of any kind, the better off we'll all be.
Well, that's great. Fantastic for sharing that with me. Is your wife on board with that, obviously?
100%. I couldn't do it without her. I mean, we all know that any successful man has a much stronger woman behind him doing at least 100% of the work, it seems like, but no.
It is. I know my wife isn't going to be supportive if I ran into politics, I can promise you that.
Right.
So now there are a couple of issues going on that you are part of, and one of them which is important to you is environment and green spaces and stuff. Yeah. So tell me, how does this affect current election that is going on about the community itself? Go ahead.
Well, so Troy is a very built out city.
Correct.
We have residential subdivisions built throughout. We have some older areas that are not formalized subdivisions, but they've had homes that have been there for 40, 50 years at this point, some of them even more than that.
Yes.
We have about 1,000 acres of parkland in our city. That includes the golf courses, but all of our city parks. And we also have some pieces of property that are privately owned that have been for decades what seemed like woods or parks for people to use that are close to their homes. And we've noticed as the economy turned around after the Great Recession, these developers and these property owners were ready to sell, and developers would buy them, and they do what developers do, full on within their rights, and they build more homes. And as a result, what we're seeing is a lot of displacement of what had traditionally been a wooded area. It turns into a new beautiful subdivision, but we have neighborhoods and neighbors who are very concerned about how that's affecting their lifestyle and the Troy that they've known and loved all these years. So, I fully support private property rights. I think that's a big part of who we are. But as a city council member and as mayor, I think it's important to try to work with the developers and the neighborhoods to have a conforming property built there, to work with the neighbors so that everybody is on the same page as best they can be. If they're going to lose a lot of their wooded space, maybe some of it can be kept so they still have some of that greenery that they've known and love all these years. So I found it really interesting over the past few years to have these controversial development projects come into these neighborhoods because it brings out a whole new group of engaged citizens. And they come out and they listen and they get involved, and they come and talk at council meetings, and they really want to be heard. So I listen to them. I will always listen to them. I think that's one of my strengths as a council member and as a candidate for mayor, honestly. Listening is so important.
And I know you've been talking about transparency quite a bit. So just give us some sense of what really is driving that.
Sure. Transparency in government is, I think, tantamount to a government success. You can't, we do public service, we're a public body, we're representing people of the city of Troy. Transparency has many different it can take on many different forms and roles in a government. Lately, we've had some issues with our former city manager.
Yes.
He's currently in prison.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah,
Yes.
most people do. You'd be surprised. Not everybody does really.
I'm sure they don't.
But,
Some people don't even keep track of anything at all.
Well,
Yeah.
that's and that's their prerogative, frankly.
Yes.
But yeah, so our former city manager is in prison. I think it's important that we get to the bottom of how that culture around City Hall came into play and how it's sustained for as long as it did, because there were complaints about him that lingered that didn't get resolved as they should. So that's part of transparency for me. Transparency and ethics. You have to have good, strong ethics in your leaders in City Hall. And if you can have transparency, then you can rebuild some of the trust in government that we need.
I agree.
And trust is a huge, huge component. And that can come across in different ways. If you don't have trust when you need your government to be there for you, it's really, really tough.
I totally agree with you on that. And I think trust is a very key component of the whole process as well. Right. So in the last couple of minutes, let's get some clarity of, is there any other issue that's important to you about the community that you feel people should be concerned about, people should take some action, and obviously you are taking action?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the missteps we've made over the past couple of years on council, and that I'd like to change as a new mayor, hopefully in November, is really focus on strong community engagement.
Okay.
Because seems to be a disconnect between what people think is happening and what actually is happening. We saw a couple of years ago a charter amendment get proposed and was on the ballot in our community about potential development of the Civic Center property. I think a lot of the animosity and the angst and the anxiety that was created in the public could have been resolved had we been much more prepared to have just stronger community engagement, stronger talking to the residents, listening, understanding, education, because it's just how you should be as a representative, right? So I really want to focus on listening to our constituents, engaging them on issues that matter. And there are several, like the development that we've talked about is a big deal to people. These neighborhoods, they are changing, and we want to try to, growth is important, develop is important. We need that to keep our tax base strong. We need that to keep a city growing and alive. But also keeping the character and the charm that we have in our community is so important to so many of us, including me. So you have to balance those interests sometimes. So if you can do that with better listening, you can do it with better community engagement, you can even do it with better transparency, right? They all kind of go together. If you look at it, I mean, people don't trust their government like they should. And when that happens, you get fear-based decisions and you get people upset. So increase the listening, increase the community engagement, increase the transparency, get some of that trust level back so we can all work together and get some of these things taken care of.
Yeah, it's hard sometimes, and everybody has their own position and they have their own data to back up whatever their beliefs are.
Right.
And then once they're pretty strong in their way of looking at it, it's hard to change their belief into what maybe the other party might look at it from that perspective. Any parting thoughts about running for mayor that people should be aware of about you, what they should be like? Is there a place to go for more information? Could you tell that?
Sure, absolutely. So I have a website. It's www.bakerfortroy.com. My contact information's on there. I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime. I ask that the voters really look at the two candidates for mayor, do their research, find out, what's important to them, find out how their experiences have been over the past several years in the community and on council, and make a wise, informed decision. And I'm really hoping to have everybody's votes.
Well, I appreciate that tremendously for you coming in. And again, I'm sure you're knocking on doors, making things happen.
Yeah.
So I just have one comment for my people here watching is that, you know what? An informed electorate is the best way to be. Just don't take one person's viewpoint, another person's viewpoint, and just wash it out. Make sure you do your own due diligence. You start asking questions and get the information, get the facts, and become comfortable, because your community is what it is. And if you and I don't take care of it, it's not going to work out for us. Thanks again for watching. This is Minesh Baxi. Bye-bye. Thanks, Ethan.
Thank you.